Evening's Dharma Talks. We are excited to be able to speak with Taiun Roshi Michael Elliston. He will be speaking to us tonight on practicing it in the four spheres and the three times. Just a note, the documents that we are discussing are going to be attached to the conference page under sto.org conference. So documents he's referenced, if you would like to review those, they're going to be at the online website. Again, everyone, thank you for joining us tonight. We will, again, let Sensei do his presentation, and then we'll open it up for questions as always. Let's welcome Taiun Roshi with a gasho. Thank you, everyone.
Good evening. This is the last individual talk this week, and it's been quite a week. I think you'll all agree. Not only here, but on the national front. If you've been paying attention, I think many of us are trying to escape a little bit the onslaught of the daily disaster. But I've been very impressed favorably and with the talks that have been given this week, and I feel that the Dharma, at least my Dharma, whatever, for what it's worth, is in good hands. We have, you're not supposed to sit on these robes, so I have to gather this up so that I don't sit on it.
And Sensei,
yes,
before you get too far in your talk, we just wanted to make sure we do the opening Dharma verse.
We will do.
Okay.
But just as an introduction, everything is Dharma. We will launch into the meat of the talk, or the content of the talk. But I just wanted to say that, well, I wouldn't go so far as to say now I can die happy, so don't get any ideas. I feel very gratified, really, to hear my students speaking. People have been practicing with me for a long, long time, many decades in some cases, and students of my students, sort of expounding the Dharma so clearly and so personally, and on very many different levels. We spoke about vulnerability quite a bit. People are able to expose their vulnerability. I don't think that my talk tonight will be so much along those lines, but I do want to talk about the vulnerabilities that we all share in the different spheres and in the three times. So let's begin with the formal opening of the Dharma opening verse. The unsurpassed, profound, and wondrous Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Now we can see and hear it, accept and maintain it. May we unfold the meaning of the Tathagata's truth. So again, as usual, if anybody needs any explanation of those terms, please feel free to contact me and we can talk about what that verse means. It does not mean that what I say will necessarily be the Dharma. That is, I may not do a very good explanation or clarification of anything here. But it means that what we're doing is the Dharma, whether we express it clearly or not. So I would like to begin by saying that my talk tonight is a little more at the intersection of design and Zen. And I'm working on a text which hopefully will draw meaningful parallels between principles of design, or you might say the precepts of design and the precepts of Zen and so forth. There are many, many parallels which I certainly won't go into tonight. But I do want to ask Corolla, ask Fusatsu if she will to post the Bucky and me picture, photograph. Bucky and me, there we go. And this was in Chicago many years ago, as you can tell. And Buckminster Fuller, I think Richard R. Buckminster Fuller was visiting a local television station to do an interview. And we caught wind of that. And a friend of mine and I ran out to see him and intercepted him after the interview. And I had a little discussion with him here. My friend was a photography student at the Institute of Design at Illinois Tech. And I'm not sure you can make it out in the size the image is. Can we make that any larger? Can we bring those up in scale? And can we bring the whole window up so that when we get to the later ones, I can tell more what I'm looking at? Okay. So behind my head, there's a starburst clock on the wall. So it looks like my head is exploding, which was an intentional, I'm sure, intentional on the part of my photographer friend. Bucky was like that. He kind of exploded your mind. I think that's what Buddha did. So I want to show you these. These are 3 ping pong balls that are 3 spheres that are painted silver so that you can see them. And with 4 of them, if you notice, they're unstable. They keep shape-shifting from a diamond pointing one way to a diamond pointing 90 degrees the other way. But when you take one away and you let the 3 nest in your palm, it becomes stable. So this illustrates a fundamental point that Fuller pointed out in terms of structure, chemical, molecular biology, chemical structure, crystals, and so forth, that 90 degrees is not really structurally stable. 60 degrees is. A triangle is something which has structural integrity, as he would say. When you put the 4th one on top, you have a tetrahedron. And tetrahedron is the first geometry that divides the universe into inside and outside, which we'll see in a moment. I'm not going to get all technical on you here, but using these symbolically, we can see that this could represent Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, the 3 treasures, the 3 legs of the stool. What does Daido Loori say? He said something, faith, doubt, perseverance, or he said something other than perseverance. 3 legs of the stool, and here you are sitting on top. So this same form can be used to symbolize and represent Zazen posture. Your 2 knees sitting on the zabuton, your rear end sitting on the cushion, and your head at the top. So if you put your hands on your knees, for instance, you kind of complete the tetrahedron where all of the edges are connected and you're bracing yourself. So why don't we do that in Zazen? We drop our hands instead into our stomach where we're no longer braced. And because of this, the hara, the stomach region of the body, the core muscles, have to come into play and hold us upright. Many forms of meditation that you see are people putting their hands on their knees like so and bracing themselves. But for every point in Zazen technique, every point in Zen, there is an actual reason for doing it. And so our Zen is not necessarily irrational, as many people might define it. There are many aspects of it that you have to say are kind of a meta rationality. So when you expand those 4 points, as we were just looking at those 4 points, which in chemistry can represent various components of a chemical compound. They can represent a molecule. They can represent parts of an atom and so forth. When you expand them and illustrate the connections like so, then you can see that you have what Fuller described as the simplest model of a system. In engineering and in general, the technological description, a system has an inside and an outside. So that's the fundamental definition of a system. The simplest geometry that creates an inside is the four-pointed tetrahedron, three-dimensional model. So if you will go to the graphic now, the one that is, you'll see this one right in the middle. There you go. That is this model used as an example of the Four Noble Truths, or as what is called a semantic model of the Four Noble Truths. If you'll click back to that one, the colorful one. And you can see that what I have done is, these are graphic representations of three-dimensional models. Four Noble Truths in the middle, the 5 aggregates up on the upper left, the 12-fold chain of interdependent origination on the upper right, the 8-fold path on the bottom left, which is one of the Four Noble Truths expanded, and the 6 paramitas on the bottom right. And the color coding in there is for a purpose, which I won't go into detail here. But what I would like to do is move from this kind of semantic modeling of 5 Mahayana teachings on one page, and many of you are familiar with this and have a copy of this and have read it. And if you would like a copy and don't have a copy, please contact us and we'll send you one online. So if you can go to the concentric circles of Zen, this one, concentric spheres. You can bring that up just a little bit. What I'd like to talk about tonight are some expansions on this idea that we have various spheres or dimensions of our practice, and we've heard from our speakers all this week about their personal practice, the social dimensions of their personal practice, where they run into 2 issues. And she, if you'd like to just bring a chair up and sit over here, you can watch the screen. The next one out, I call the natural sphere, and the final one, the universal sphere. Jumping to a more complicated, what would you call it, complete modeling of this, you can see that we have in the personal sphere, we have this tetrahedron that we just looked at as the person sitting there. And what you have in the 4-pointed model, which really comes from Bodhidharma, is you have essentially feeling, seeing, hearing, and thinking. That is, Bodhidharma talked about having, what can we observe in our meditation? We observe the breathing, right? We observe our physical sensations. We observe our emotional sensations, mood swings that come and go. We observe, finally, we observe conceptual models and conceptual thinking about Zen, about life, and so forth. The main point I think that Bodhidharma was trying to make, and I believe this is covered in Red Pine's, the Zen teachings of Bodhidharma, is that all of these things that we witness and that we can observe, including the breath, including our physical feelings, including emotional feelings, including conceptual constructions, are essentially impermanent and changing, always changing. And so the observer, that person who is observing these things, these are my feelings, these are my thoughts, and so forth, must also, therefore, be impermanent. This is the most difficult part of the teaching for us to embrace. So let's go to the latest one. Let's see, pan down, I think it is. I'm not sure. If you scroll down. Okay. There's another one that is That's the article, not the article. Did we copy the article to everybody so people could read the article?
I'm linking it.
Okay.
Want me to do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so that's some background reading you can do. The one that I'm looking for is the most recent one, which is the social sphere, the detail on the social sphere. So most of what we hear people talking about in Zen Dharma talks in general, and in those that we have heard this week, have to do with the interface or the boundary between the personal sphere of practice and the social sphere of practice. In a sense, this is where all of the friction sets in, where all the trouble begins, and where all of the conflicts arise. Have we found that one yet? Nope. So we go into a closer examination of that particular sphere. Now, think about the personal sphere. Here you are sitting in a bubble. You're sitting in your own bubble. You literally could sit in a sphere. If you sit in a zazen, the sphere would wrap around your knees and go over your head and so forth and surround you. And when you step out of that sphere into the next level out, you're stepping into the social sphere. Here at the Zendo, when we're meeting in person, that is the Sangha. The first level here would be the Sangha. But in your personal realm, that first sphere, first layer of it would be your family. So, haven't found it yet?
I do. Yep, I'm trying to get it over to you now.
Are these all in the same file?
It is. It's
Okay. So the social sphere, here we go. If you can expand that, enlarge it. This is just a little more detail in labeling as to the complexities within each of these. In the personal sphere, we can go into all the details on biology, meditation, and so forth, and we'll take a look at that in a minute. In fact, let's go to that. If you can go to that first, the one you just scrolled down to a minute ago that shows the two figures sitting there, the graphic on the two figures. Leave this one, we'll come back to it. If you can go down. Sorry about this, folks. It was in the original group toward the bottom. If you scroll down, if you can bring that one up, the bottom one, bring that up in scale. When we sit in Zazen, we think of it as something very simple, right? We're simplifying our life and we're sitting there. But if you take a close look, as Master Dogen would say, thoroughly study and practice, everything that's going on there, I did this diagram to look at the actual physiological things that are happening in the personal sphere when you're sitting in meditation. There's the crown of your head, there's your forehead, there's your mouth, there's your throat, your heart, your stomach, your pelvis, your crotch, and so forth. The bones, you can go through the bones, and we have a medical doctor in the room who could do a better job of this than I. If you can scroll down a little bit more, center that one up. There we go. And then if you look at the organs, you have the brain, you have the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, etc., into the lungs and into the stomach, and so forth, all the way down. Then you have the functions that you have: conception, perception, and the seeing and hearing, respiration, right? That is breathing, right? Circulation, the heart, the blood. You have respiration in the lungs. You have digestion, absorption. You have, I'm having a hard time reading it from here, but you have there you go, functions towards the bottom, elimination, etc. So you have all this stuff that's going on willy-nilly, whether you like it or not. And you're not controlling any of that. To some degree, we can control it. But if you try to deny the call of Mother Nature, say, wait a minute, later for that, I'm doing meditation now, leave me alone. Just see how far you get with that. Then there's a rough correlation over on the far right. This is starting to look a little bit like Kylie and Chi here. Anyway, on the right, you know, you could roughly say right view. It has something to do with conception and perception and so forth. Thought, you know, has to do with the brain, and speech is in this region of the mouth. Action, it could be everywhere with action, but primarily the breathing is our main source of energy and keeps us alive. You know, if you go 5 minutes without breathing, that's usually it. And then livelihood is what we do for work usually, but in Buddhism, I think livelihood means everything you do to nurture your life. It's not just what you do to make money. Effort in Zen, again, we usually focus it in the tanden and the hara. The effort is being made in the body. Mindfulness, we think, is anchored in the base of our posture. Not mindfulness is not just up here in the head. So there's a rough correlation there even that you can make, and so I threw that in. Then going through the male figure and the female figure are all these various spheres of breathing points, like in the martial arts, as Frederick Likut Jiryu gave us a talk one time about how in the martial arts they have 8 tandens, and not just the one that we call the tanden, which is behind their hands in the pit of your stomach. That's where we tend to focus our breath, as if we're breathing in and out of that spot. Matsuoka Roshi said a lot of things about that. He said the breath is like a bellows. This fanning the tanden as if it's fire or the smoldering of the tip of a stick of incense, for instance. And with each bellows fanning of the breath, it becomes hotter and hotter until it burns through all the resistance in the body. He also said, feed your thoughts to the tanden as if they are fuel to a fire, and consume them in the pit of your stomach. So Jiryu, Frederick Likut, said in the martial arts they have these 8. One is at the crown, one is at the tip here, one is right in the middle of the forehead, what we sometimes refer to as the third eye. One is just here in the upper teeth, just below the nose. The other is right here on the collarbone, just below the Adam's apple. The other's in the heart, the other's in the stomach, the other's a tanden that we refer to as in the pit of the pelvis, and the other's in the crotch. So while he was here, we did some exercises of breathing as if we're breathing through each of those points. So you might try this sometime if you're finding you're having a little difficulty in your zazen. And I found this particularly effective when doing kinhin, walking meditation. To put your attention at the crown of your head as if the breath is going in and out there at that point, and then put it here in the forehead, and then put it here and so forth, and go through these points. And then in martial arts, he said they go up the backside as if we're circling around these 8 points again and again like this. So you can go either direction. This is a way of visualizing, or a way of creating a model for practice, which you may or may not find useful. And if we look into Dogen, all the teachers of the past, they're quoting these models like the 5 so-called Goi koans from Dongshan Tozan, our founder, Soto Zen founder in China. 4 relationships between guest and host in Rinzai, Linqi teaching. Many, many such models, which are similar to these semantic models throughout history. And if you go back to India, you find that the teachings are enumerated. There's 4 of this, and there's 5 of that, and 6 of this, 12 of those, and so forth. And 53, 52 states of bodhisattvahood, something like that. So I think in the case of India, the writings, the teachings weren't written down for something like 400 years. And so the only way you could really practice them, learn them, hear them, would be to go to where the monks were gathered, and Ananda or somebody else would lead, and everybody else would chant. And they would recite the teachings of Buddha after he died. When Buddha was alive, apparently they did something similar, I'm not sure. maybe they didn't. Maybe it was only after he died that they decided they had to recite these teachings so they wouldn't lose them. We think it's a more accurate transmission of the teachings for those first 4 centuries or so, because if you join a group and have to recite them along with everybody else, and you don't have a written reference, you can't screw it up, really. You can't change it. And to learn them, you have to actually memorize them. So very, very different sort of learning process than we stress today. But I recommend that each of you take up this practice of memorization and take something brief like the Metta Sutta that we heard from this week. Take up Zazen Shen, one of Dogen's briefer ones, and memorize it. And when you're driving in traffic, chanting, as Nancy was talking about, is one of the things you can do to supplement your practice. It's not a substitute for sitting in Zazen. There's nothing like Zazen. But I think it's important for us to understand that I'm using these graphic mnemonics similarly to the way the original teachings used enumeration to create a framework in which you can remember that there are 8 points of the Eightfold Path. So I can try to remember, what was that 8th one? I can't remember that 8th one, and so forth. These are visualizations that help you kind of see the pattern. You know, we're suffering from mass data now. So when I say suffering, we have the difficulty in data gathering, mining data, they call it, mining metadata or mining mass data is, you know, what does it mean? How do you find patterns in it? And so obviously from a design perspective, the first thing you do is visualize it. You make it visual so a different sense can grasp it other than just trying to think through it with thoughts, thinking about thoughts, thinking about thoughts. Mathematics, I think, is another language in which patterns become workable and recognizable that way. So this is what part of what Sangaku was talking about today, and as we saw in the film, Zinku was talking about my particular approach to the propagation of Zen is more along design lines. I'm not sure it's all that creative. I think it's very traditional. When we look back in history and we see how, you know, even the temples in South America, these were all attempts to visualize and inscribe teachings in such a way that people could see them, the stupas in India. They're all along these lines of the intersection, you might say, of design, three-dimensional materials, and in this case, two-dimensional, that are beyond just language, beyond just words, but trying to help you in the models that the various ancestors came up with for their students were compassionate efforts to try to help their students actually sort of visualize this. It's not thinking so much. It's more like Einstein's visceral thought experiments, where he would imagine what it must be like for 2 clocks to be moving at light speed past each other. What would happen to the time they register, that kind of thing. And he claimed that he would, you know, everybody knows he would sit there with a pen in his hand and sort of space out until he fell into a trance-like state, hypnagogic, hypnopompic type of state, half awake, half asleep. The pen would fall and that would wake him up and he'd pick it up and start over. So very much a meditative process, very much what we do when we do Zazen. These images that I'm creating are attempts to help you kind of get into the intuitive or creative or visualization side of your brain, you might say, and more somewhat away from the words. But you can see I'm using words here to label and caption the images so that we don't walk away from the logic of language and so forth, but we use it to our advantage rather than being used by it. So Fusatz, if you can go back to the one on the social dimension and bring that up as large as you can. This is just going into one of these spheres. The personal is still in the middle, and the red lines demark where it goes, it transitions from Can that come up any higher? It transitions from the personal into the social. And then beyond the social realm here, the outer red line would be moving into now the natural, and then beyond that, the universal outside of this. So I plan to do this with each of these dimensions and sort of expand them. I think you might have to bring that down a little so we can see the copy. So if you look at it, you might have to shrink it just a little bit. If we look at it, we see that now instead of just social, and I've taken the word social out altogether to say that within the social would be these other words. And I use the same grammatical construction ending with AL just for consistency. So you have the familial is the first. You know, familial piety, we hear this from China, right? A very important Confucian principle. If you look at the familial, you say that's the first sort of dimension away from the personal, where you first leave the personal and enter into an engagement. And so if you look at the upper left column, you say under familiar, you'd have things like your grandparent, your parents, you'd have your siblings, your spouse, or your grandchildren, your children, your cousins, your in-laws even, your extended family. Extended family is probably where you begin to see Sangha. You know, we're kind of like an extended family. Okamura Roshi said once I had undergone my transmission ceremony with him, he said, now we're all one Dharma family. So family is a wonderful name. You have Dharma uncles, Dharma brothers, Dharma sisters, Dharma grandfathers, Dharma daughters, even Dharma sons. Buddha was known for speaking to his followers and often saying good sons, you know. They had mostly men in the beginning. It was later that women came into the community. So we look at what we're doing is not only establishing community in a sense, but looking at it as an extended family. And families are not always harmonious. Families are not always good to each other. And the relationships within family can be neurotic, they can be perverse. We all understand that. But the first dimension out being familial, and it's interesting, I don't know if it's the same root as familiar or not. It may be, probably is, right? Familiar and family, probably very similar. Then this next one out would be collegial. And you could put your own terms in here. I did one first draft on this. This is not thoroughly thought out. And by the way, my talk, as I said tonight, it's not going to be so personal and about vulnerability. I'm going to introduce vulnerability into this matrix in a minute. But it's more about, you know, how can we find means and techniques, skillful means, for us to approach in a bigger picture, a broader scope, some of the things that we're wrestling with on this personal and social level. And so collegial, for instance, means things like your teachers, your mentors. You might notice in the food chant we do, the meal chant, we dedicate to the four benefactors. And the four benefactors, as I understand, are the governors of the country, our teachers, and so forth, our parents. There are four major benefactors that we pay respect to as having the efforts that brought us this food and so forth. So we have mentors. We have a mentor network that we set up within our Dharma family, where you can find an affiliation or an affinity with somebody like Chi or like Fusatsu, where you think you'd like to train with them for a year, at least have them as a sounding board, that kind of thing. You have peers, which are certainly not necessarily mentors, but they often have unwarranted effect upon us, especially in our teen years and so forth. Then you have colleagues at work, colleagues of all kinds. You have the alumni or alumnus from your university where you studied. So there's all kinds of collegial, meaning colleague, I think, relationships that we have, and that may be part of the root meaning of the word college. I went to college, you know. It means a collegial kind of relationship. So I think that may be next out in terms of intimacy and familiarity. And then the next one out, I think we go to what I express here as communal. It's just communal in a broader sense, that you have your roommate, for instance. You may not be a teacher, a mentor, a peer, a colleague, and so forth. You may just have this roommate in college that you have. Or you may, nowadays, people have to bunk up together to just because of the economy. So you have roommates that you don't necessarily like. We have 6 residents here, and they're very harmonious, but we've had residents here who were not at all harmonious in the past. So your roommate may not necessarily fit one of these other categories. So then you have neighbors. And in my neighborhood, I know some of my neighbors. I have some wonderful neighbors. I have some very problematic neighbors, and so forth. Then you have club memberships where you're part of the Rotary Club, and you get to know, you have comrades in arms in the military. You have charitable activities, and you join charity groups and you contribute to charitable groups. And this goes back to what she was talking about in groups. There's all these kind of groups. And then you have networking in general. Sometimes business networking, but sometimes networking is done as support groups for addiction and those kinds of things. So I think that might be the next sort of level out, would be from personal to first familial, then collegial, then communal. And then I'm saying, let's go ahead and jump into the political fray, right? Next is maybe political. Then you have people like canvassers, a young guy born and raised in Germany, came to our house the other day. We leave our door open so the cats can go in and out during the day. And I talked to him for a while, and he's trying to raise money for Amnesty International. So you have canvassers coming around with good causes. They're behind this cause. And you have community organizers like Barack Obama, who became president. You have the school boards. And these are your first stepping stones to political life often. You have your aldermen and councilmen. You have your mayor, your commissioners. You have your attorney generals. You have governor, Congress, the executive, and so forth on the federal level, the 3 branches of government. You have all of that. And so when you move into the social realm, this is the kind of smorgasbord of complexity that you're dealing with. And all of us have to admit that those are all playing parts in our practice. The original model made the point, and I talked about this a lot before, so I'm not going to go into detail, that you go out from the personal out into these outer realms, and you have some influence on them. You have some effect on the social level by what you do. And I think we maybe make too much of this in Zen, that we think we're so powerful and we have such terrific effect on everybody. So we need a little more humility around that, I think. But anyway, you have effect on them, but also they have effect on you. So the vector goes both ways. And when you get out to the natural realm, you see what we're doing to the natural world and how we're polluting, and we're not going to destroy the planet. It's going to destroy us. We're going to create a situation, as Okamura Roshi was asked about this, and he said, I'm afraid we're like a cancer. We're going to kill our host. We're not going to kill it. We're going to kill the ability for the planet to support us. So the next Zen masters are going to be cockroaches. Next generation. So anyway, the political, and we have assiduously, studiously avoided that until Chi dropped his bomb today. And then beyond that, and part of that, you have this infrastructure that we often interpret as political, but it's really not. If you go back and study the Greek histories, Plato, Republic, and all that, you begin to see that there was a point at which a tribe got so large that they had to begin to create structures that they didn't need when there was only 150 people in the tribe. They had to start specializing who did what, who made the weapons, who did this part, who grew the food, because it was just getting unmanageable. And so you had the city-states pop up. And it's interesting, if you go back and read Plato's Republic and some of those classics, you begin to see resonances on what's going on now that you just, I was pretty illiterate in terms of a liberal education. I didn't get this kind of deep training. I had a very special course in high school in which we studied the Greek tragedies and we studied the Bible and we studied Hemingway and so forth. But I didn't get deep. I was on a design track. I was on an art design track kind of thing. So I didn't get deep sort of conditioning in this, but it's just a mind blower when you go back and read those things. You say, wow, if only I had known. So then you have the county, then you have the province, which I guess is another word for county, the region, the regional organizations, and you get up to the nation, and you get up to the world finally. And one of the big conflicts is profiled nowadays is we have people who are seeing a world around government, as Bucky Fuller did. He talked about world around systems, and that's unavoidable. We have to, he called it spaceship Earth. We have to treat this planet as a spaceship that's flying through space, and we've all got to get our act together and make sure that the recycling systems within this spaceship are going to support us, just like a satellite, space station orbiting the Earth has to. Otherwise, everybody dies. So you have a conflict now between the so-called world citizens, and we have many of those in our Sangha, and people who are nationalists or isolationists and so forth. It's just another way of self-identifying according to Buddhism. It's a clumsy, ignorant way of self-identifying. It closes your eyes to more than you open your eyes to. And then you go into the international realm, number 4, as maybe the furthest out of this social dimension or sphere. And then you have things like travel. We want to travel and be tourists and go kind of take pictures and look at other things and go to the wonders of the world. And now we want to go climb Mount Everest, and we find it's just full of trash now. They have ladders for you to climb. So it's just turned into a travesty compared to what you have in mind, and you're thinking, I want to go do this. I've got this mythology about it. And everybody's going to the same place. And then now we have another division of the 1% and the 99 of the hoi polloi. We're not going there anymore where all those people go. We're going to go to all these special places that cost a hell of a lot more and they can't afford to go. So it just keeps replicating itself over and over as a neurotic pattern. Then you have the issue of immigration is definitely on the international scale, and business. How do we balance out the idea of running a business, making profit, paying taxes, supporting when we have all of this overseas, and we're putting our money in the Cayman Islands and so forth. So anyway, I just thought it would be interesting to do kind of a gloss on this and say, well, what are all the things we could say maybe in the social sphere? And what are the closest? And what are typically, the way we think about it, the furthest away? But I'd like you to put that back for one more minute. What I'd like you to consider is vulnerability. So in the personal realm, you could say that we are vulnerable to our own monkey mind machinations, right? We're vulnerable to our own neuroses. We're vulnerable to our own DNA. You could have DNA, parentage, the health that we're in, aging, sickness, and death, the 3 cardinal marks of dukkha, or suffering, that Buddha pointed out. Those are the kind of things we're vulnerable to in the personal realm. We can't escape those. But as soon as we move into the social realms, look at all the things we're vulnerable to. It's not just that we have these grandparents, but we're vulnerable to our grandparent, may be the batty old guy in the attic that we try to keep anybody from coming in contact with because he's completely nuts, or they may be totally politically alienated from where you're coming from. Thanksgiving has become, mudslinging in many families from what we hear. So at each of these levels, you could say in the familial level, you have other vulnerabilities there. People who are in the sandwich generation, trying to take care of kids and also parents at the same time, and et cetera, minus the COVID virus or with the COVID virus just piled on top. Then in collegial relationships at work, look at the vulnerabilities. You've got a bad boss. You've got a dead-end job, no possibility of advancement and so forth. So the reason I bring these things up is they come up in Dokusan all the time. These are the issues that people bring up in Dokusan. And our answer in Zen is not a happy, feel-good type of answer. It's more like, yeah, that's the Dharma. That's what Buddha was saying all along. It's much more complicated now than it was 2,500 years ago, maybe, but the basics are the same. They're exactly the same. So it's not exactly cavalier or get used to it kind of dismissal. It's more like, yeah, let's define this problem. In design, problem definition is the sort of worldview that we take. And so we see everything as a problem that can be solved. But before you can solve the problem, you have to define it. You have to define it so thoroughly that the solution is implicit or inherent in the definition. In most cases, what we try to do is leap to a solution before we bother to define the problem thoroughly. So here what I'm trying to do is define the problem thoroughly. And so hopefully, if we can get a picture of the problem in all of its homeliness, we might be able to see more creative solutions for us as individuals and for us as a community, as a Sangha. So anyway, that's all I had to say. I didn't prepare this. This is all improvised. And I really appreciate the preparation that everybody else did this week, their careful preparation. But I get this on kind of a gut level feel, and I feel like I need to share this with you, as ragged as it is. And it's put out there as kind of run up the flagpole, see who salutes. This is the approach and design. The feedback that I get from you on this will help clarify my thinking about it. So this is a collaborative process. This is the way we understand Dharma, through collaboration. Even Buddha did not understand it. So we have to have a dialogue about it. And maybe we'll come to, like Socrates, Socratic method, maybe everybody will come to a deeper understanding, a deeper insight.
So now comes the opportunity for us to have a conversation with Sensei. Comments, questions, what things that came up for you during the Dharma talk. So please, if you have questions, comments, please come off of mute, raise your hands, and myself and Cosettes will try to catch the hands as they go up. Gassho, everyone. Let's have a conversation. Yes, Sanki.
Sankia, I think Pusat's recognized you. Go ahead and unmute.
Sounds like digestion going on to me.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good. Sensei, I guess the question I want to ask is, when we're dealing with folks, we're on that in the Dharma, when we're in the Zendo and dealing with our Sangha and members of our Sangha, we're dealing that's a social relationship that's very important, and that a lot of times Sangha members can feel very strongly about different kinds of things like politics and other things, and I think sometimes I've noticed anyway, there's some folks that remain a bit quiet when some of those discussions going on, and then you talk to them, you find out that they're really not part of that. The question I guess I've got is is it right, or not, maybe not right, is it practical to try to dig underneath that sort of thing and relate, try to get to them? You're on that to try to get to them on that personal level that's underneath the politics and the and all of these kinds of things, even editorial, perhaps, or is that too intrusive? Maybe, I don't know.
I think your question answers itself. You're a black robe, and black robes are allowed, or, you know, the tradition is that black robes can host practice discussions with individuals, which can get pretty intimate if you're not too careful about them. But you're not allowed to do dokusan, according to the formal view. Dokusan theoretically gets us something much deeper, the Buddha Dharma. Practice discussion can be more around just practical things, everyday life, which is where Chi ended up in his talk today on the practical level. And Dogen always brings it down to the sort of concrete, practical, everyday thing, taking action. Now, what do you do? So you answer your own question, really, because obviously, yes, of course, of course. So the question is not whether, but it's more how. How do you do it? And how becomes the skillful means. Now, I don't know if I've sent to you, but I've sent out to a lot of people a non-directive interview technique, which I was trained in quite intensively back in Chicago when I was with a consumer research firm. And this was developed by Carl Rogers during World War II. It's called Rogerian technique, where he had to interview resistant draftees. And it has to do with establishing rapport, making people comfortable, things like that. But it also has to be a different way of talking and a different way of asking questions, so they're not challenging. And so you help the other person relax and open up and be able to talk to you, and they understand they can trust you and they can talk to you without your trying to win the game, win the dialogue. So if you don't have that, if anybody wants that, I will certainly be happy to send it to you. So in learning that, it's kind of it's called the non-directive interview technique. You learn how to probe deeper into what the person is saying. And you have the chance, you have the opportunity of getting to a deeper level of beyond defensiveness. The most salient example I can give you is when I was in Chicago, we were doing a series of interviews for one of the local newspapers, probably could have been Chicago Tribune, I don't remember which one. And they wanted to understand more about what were the fear points in the person's daily life. Was it their boss? Was it their wife? You know, where were they? Where did they have, anxiety on steroids? Where, they thought that if they understood that better about their readership, that they could maybe construct the paper along those lines so that it would be more appealing. A very, very straightforward marketing kind of question. And those are not done in a group because people aren't going to disclose that kind of thing. So they're done one-on-one. And we used to use these little Wallenstock 5-inch reel-to-reel tape recorders, little small things. That was the first kind of portable tape recorders that came out. So you'd go to their home. You would set up an appointment. You go to their home. You sit down, and you're kind of invading their space. So all of this bit about making people feel comfortable and being able to open talk to you is more and more important. And nowadays they have big commercial outfits that set up the spaces. It's different now than it used to be. Anyhow, so this one guy I did this interview with, and we were instructed to not cut them off on anything, let it go as long as it had to go. Typically, a focus group will run about 90 minutes with 10 or 12 people, and that's a lot. That's a lot of information. I had one guy that I interviewed, I think it went for 3 hours. And at the end of that interview, he was saying, Nobody's ever understood me like you understand me. You know, we could be such great friends. And you listen, you run the tape back and I'm saying, oh, tell me more about that. What is there about that that makes you feel that way? I don't feel that way, but tell me, you know, what makes you feel that kind of thing. Probes. Just come out more. People need somebody to listen to them. This is a huge, huge need. So you can learn to interview people, and it's not insidious. It's not nefarious. You don't have any motive other than to understand where they're really coming from. And this includes in-laws, relatives, people you disagree with politically. You might find that on some deeper level, they will be able to express fears that they have to you, and you'll be able to agree with those fears, that you have those too. It's just the way you go about dealing with them is different from the way they're going about dealing with them. So it's very, very powerful. It can be used for nefarious purposes. If you want to seduce somebody, you can use it to do that. But I recommend that when you find yourself in a situation where and an interviewer, a moderator of an interview like that cannot express an opinion, because if you do, you bias the information. So you learn how to engage in an entire conversation without ever having an opinion about the subject. How different is that from what we see in most so-called dialogues or debates today? So it's kind of a jujitsu of language. It's kind of a jujitsu of conversation where they fall into, you know, they fall into your realm by virtue of their own power and so forth. So that's what I recommend, that in tough, sticky situations, and for that same reason, that you cannot have an opinion. If you express an opinion, you bias the whole group or the individual. There are techniques called deflection and reflection. Deflection is when somebody challenges you and you say, okay, Sarah, you know, that's a very important issue, good question, and I mean to try to answer that question, but before I do, let me ask everybody else, how do you feel about what Sarah just said? You've deflected it to the group. Then reflection is when you bounce it back to them and you say, I'm going to try to answer that question because I think you brought up something very important, but tell me, what makes you ask that question? That's called reflection. So you learn these techniques. It took me over 3 years to get sort of natural at it. And they're really very Zen-like. And many people are empathic this way and they talk this way naturally. But most of us don't. Most of us are trained to have an opinion. You have to have an opinion and you have to defend your opinion, and so forth. So it begins on that kind of transactional level. But when you're doing Dokusan, you want it to go to a deep level where this person trusts you and they can trust you. You're not going to do anything bad with this information that they're sharing with you.
Yep, and Sensei, I want to do a time check. We are 3 minutes over, but I want to.
Oh, okay.
Are you okay with that?
I'm done.
If you want to take some.
No, I'll stay as long as anybody wants to stay. I didn't mean to go on so long, but as usual, Sankey asked a very complicated question to which there is no simple answer. But we have skillful means to deal with it.
Any other, everybody good, or any other?
Start me up, I never stop. I would love to hear from some of you. I don't know several of you very well, and I would love to hear from you. That's a good way of establishing a relationship. And if you want to contact me after, just get my email from the powers that be here, and we can have a follow-up conversation. But I really love to hear if this struck anybody else tonight. When I do these kind of talks, I have no idea if they're having any effect or not. And so the feedback helps me. So do me a favor, ask a question or make a comment. Some of you are out west. All the people out west stay on because it's early.
I want to pick on Kanzon. He's just shaking his head over there.
I saw another hand go up before when there it is. Okay.
There we go, Tassim.
Yeah, I think I'm off mute here.
You are.
Yeah. Sensei, thank you so much for your talk. I mean, it's quite a bit of information to unpack from that, which is going to be a fun process. But you know, there was at some point I remembered something. I think it may have been something from R.D. Lang, Self and Others, perhaps, but like a little illustration. So this is not a complicated question, but basically like a cartoon of two people. And the typical way that we look at communication is that the top of one guy's head would flip open, and there would be, you know, something thrown over to the other person. You know, they'd catch it, you know, gobble it up, and then their head would pop open, and they say, really, it's what happens between the two people is where we really, really live.
Right.
But we tend to think it's me trying to win over, and it's the me versus them, you know, to go back to
The group thing.
exactly.
Yeah, in communications design, we say it's the message received, not the message sent, which is often a very different message. I remember Pogo. Anybody remember the Pogo comic strip, Albert the Alligator, and so on? And Albert was doing something one day, and Pogo said something about he wanted to teach somebody something that Albert did. And Albert said, I don't want to teach him, I want to learn him. So, you know, you want to aggressively teach somebody a lesson, and you're going to teach them a lesson, all right, but not the lesson you intend to teach them. And so real communication has to do with listening, not talking, as we all know. And this method that Carl Rogers developed is a way of training yourself how to mechanically almost, how to actually listen in any given situation, to be a good listener. And then at a given point, if you really need to make a point with this person, you might get to a deep enough level. You can't do this in research, it's unprofessional. But in a personal situation where you're really trying to help somebody, and you get to a deep enough personal level where they really trust you, you may be able to say just exactly, or do just exactly what needs to be done in that situation that will have the effect of kind of breaking through their bubble. And in the history of Zen, that's called a wato, in Japanese W-A-T-O, and in Chinese H-U-A-T-O, wato, meaning a turning word, a gesture that a master does or uses that actually helps his student. But it can't be artificial. It has to be in the moment and of the moment. It has to be contextual. That's why when we read these koan stories from the past, they're so hard to penetrate, because you're not there, you're not living that way. You're not, with Joshu and does dog have Buddha nature, Mu, there's a real dog there. You're not there with that real dog at that time.
Thank you, Sensei.
Hello,
Mokyo?
Sensei. This is Mokyo.
Hey, Mokyo.
I really liked the communication agreement that was sent out before the conference. And to speak to what you had just said, one of the things in there was be aware of the impact, not the intent. And I thought that was very powerful and very helpful to me.
You know, the road to hell is paved.
That's right. You talked about the solution is inherent in the definition of the problem.
That's the theory. Yeah.
Could you give an example of that? I'm not sure I understand exactly what that means.
Okay. Let's take one. Which this goes to a Zen principle. Somebody said Zen is about the pursuit of the understanding of meaning. Now we think understanding and meaning are the same thing, so, but they're not really. We understand how to drive a car, right? But we don't know its meaning, and its meaning turns out to be worldwide pollution, for one thing, right? We have events in our life like getting married, getting divorced, deaths, birth of a child, deeply, deeply meaningful, but we don't understand it. We have to admit we don't understand it. So understanding and meaning are not the same thing. So ask me your question again, once we've established that point.
Well, it was just the solution is the solution of the problem is inherent in the definition.
And with the caveat that it is the most thorough and complete definition that you and your team can come up with. In some cases, you might have to bring in other people, experts. So for instance, if you said, well, let's design a better car. Let's design a better automobile, and so on. And you have Tesla and you have all the electric cars and so forth that are going on now. But what can happen in the definition of the problem, I'm going to give you another piece of dense information, sorry, Tessin, to think about. Creative processes, typically, whether it's writing a book, doing a painting, solving a design problem, putting together a Zen center, a program of some sort of practice, they always go through a similar kind of process, and there's a lot of feedback loops in the process. As Sangak talked a lot about today, that we have to be agile, basically. We have to be, our 5-year plan cannot be set in concrete. It has to allow for variability, creativity, and so forth. That's the only way you can plan. So it doesn't mean what plans used to mean. Every creative process goes through certain steps, and there are guys well known in design, like a guy named Pasternak, who studied methods. Methodology actually means the study of method itself. And this is done a lot in design because we see that this group is turning out an awful lot of really good design. So you want to find out what their method is for getting there from here. Now, my master's thesis was the design of the company that I moved to Atlanta with, that I'd worked with in consumer research in Chicago, where I learned to do the interview technique and all of that. But my department, I was head of what was called the translations department, and we would translate the findings into potential design ideas for the client. So you go through a process of interfacing with the end user if you can, and that's one way. But every design process goes through what from a process that I came to recognize as equivalent to "excuse me, my dear Aunt Sally." Excuse me, my dear Aunt Sally are the arithmetical operations you have to go through to solve quadratic equations. You have to solve the exponents first, what's under the radical. Then you do multiplication, you do all the multiplication. Then you do the division, dear, and then you do aunt, the addition, and then you do Sally at the end, subtraction. If you do them out of order, your answer is going to be incorrect. So it occurred to me that that's the same process we go through for any creative process. What's the root of the problem? What's under the radical? What are we trying to do here? Why are we even doing this? And again, looping back, we may have to revisit that. We may get off on a tangent and we're no longer solving the same problem anymore. So then the next thing you do is you brainstorm, you free associate everything that might be associated with this particular problem that we're defining. And you try to get everybody to open as much as possible in the group. You put it all on a whiteboard. Then you divide it. Then you begin taking the mosaic apart, and it's a mind map or a mosaic, and putting it into categories and columns where you start fleshing out the addition to see if this one is incomplete. There are some things we forgot we didn't think about in this particular group. And then the next step is the My Dear Aunt Sally addition. That's you're filling those in. And then the last one is subtraction. What can we set aside that we don't need to use now? That's equivalent to editing a book at the end of doing all these other steps. At the end, you edit and you take out. And the books I'm publishing, I learned the hard way. The publisher sent it back first time, said, you got 2 books here. So I had to take half of the manuscript out, subtracting big time, right? So that process is a thoroughgoing, serious consideration of the problem, which doesn't leave out things like, okay, we can extract the oil. What's the cost to the environment? Oh, I didn't think about that because it's not beneficial for me to think about that because then my prices really have to go up and I'm not going to sell any oil, right? But a thorough examination of the problem is an honest, objective, almost Zen-like process where you try to imagine, visualize, and get everything out there that is part of this problem. And then you start organizing until you get down to a point of action. And that's the point of the end thing of subtracting it down to what can we deal with now? Where do we focus our attention now? In research, when you work with a client, you bring them back this mosaic of possibilities. Like Kimberly Clark, infant care, we did a big study. We had things for the bed, we had things for feeding the infant, we had all these other things, safety things. They wanted to focus on diapers. Right? So the next phase, okay, we expected that, but we go into diapers, and then you expand out from there. So it's a thoroughgoing process, as there's not a simple answer to it. But one of our new members is considering forming a company, and she and her husband want us, Andrew and I do this for businesses. We conduct this type of seminar and brainstorming process. So we're going to do one for her. You have to take the particular problem definition that you're starting with, and the client will bring you one. Part of your job is to redefine the problem for the client. And then you go into this process and you begin to expand it and see. For instance, if you want to design a new car, and you may end up designing an approach in which you no longer need cars. You have eliminated the problem that you were trying to redesign. A common assignment in design school is design a chair. Do we need another chair? No, we got plenty of chairs. No, nobody needs another chair. That's not the point. The point is the design student now has to think about, well, how could I design and build a chair that somehow has meaning in the current context, of billions of chairs having been designed and so forth. So that's what I mean. It's more on a meta level, but what you want to come out with after this process, and it typically with a good team, a good client, you might come up with an admirable solution, something we can take action on within the space of an afternoon. It accelerates the process a great deal. Otherwise, you're left with coming up with something, trying to market it, it fails, and you don't know why it failed. Again, start me up. Sorry. This stuff is in my bones. If you look here, you can see a part of a design process that designed a Zendo.
Yep.
It's up to you. If there's any other burning question, I'm happy to answer, but otherwise.
I'm not seeing any other.
Okay.
So what we'll do, Sensei, is we'll go to the closing Dharma verse and then go back into our service.
Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize that beings are numberless. I vow to free delusions are exhausted. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Thank you for your patience and listening.
Thank you for your teaching, Sensei. Again, folks,
May
we're
you
going
be
to
well.
the last part of the service, Zazen, and then we'll do our Tisarana. Please take a few minutes.